So, friends and everyone around, I'm sure you know the big elephant in the room of Nigerian music ecosystem, particularly music education. So 2 years ago, let's say by end of this month or first week of August, we started what is now popular, at least, as the Organhouse Concert and Seminar Series 2 years ago. And part of that series, the idea is to take the scholarly rigor into the community and bringing the community into the scholarly community. I don't know if that makes sense. They say taking the whatever to the gown and bringing the gown to the, yeah. So what we have done so far, the idea of the series itself is simply to create what we call alternative space. So we felt that, well, music education in the 70s in Nigeria, scholarship was strong, not only stronger in the sense of publication output. We have fantastic scholars whose contribution or the effect of their work are still part of us today. And that went on until the mid-90s. You know what happened? Yeah. But I'm so happy also because that season, until the mid-90s, we have some significant work in Nigeria. And we are happy that we have Professor Omojola today, who was one of those, pioneers of that time. But the series itself was simply to redefine, that's the word, what music scholarship is in Nigeria. I don't know if we have achieved that or not. I don't know. But you will judge. But what I've seen that is quite important that I need to mention about the series is that we have not expanded in terms of curation. We have also expanded in terms of academic activities, which has now led to the department. Of course, the department started a graduate program just a year before that event, And from one student 2 years ago, the department has 20 postgraduate students. So for us, that's a big deal because our program was not just about talking or doing research or scholarship in the traditional way of the town. What we simply did at the time was to push the agenda and redefine, and by creating another forms of contest, alternative space. And that space, everybody saw it. And of course, the conversation is out there and it's ongoing. And because of that, we started this series. But this series today has become, I won't say it's global, yes, I think that's the word. It's global now because people are joining us from the US as I speak. People are joining us. So what we're having right now with you is perhaps your own take on the series. And that we are focusing also in the context of this symposium. And we've discussed your work series. In fact, there's hardly a scholar that has come on board on that series that has not mentioned Kofi Agawu. Yeah, there's hardly. Yeah, there's hardly a scholar.
Okay, so you're asking many questions here, but let me just start. let me start with this idea of town and gown and going back and forth.
Yeah.
And just to make the obvious point that scholarship demands time, commitment, and so on. And there are different kinds of scholars. Some of us like to operate at a certain level. Others want to combine scholarship with other things. These are choices that we all make as individuals. But it's important not to undercomplicate what a scholar who is trying to get to the highest level in their thinking, engage with other scholars or people who are working in other fields. These make very heavy demands on you as an individual. So it is the case that sometimes some of us are not necessarily thinking, let me formulate this so that every person walking on the street can understand. We have what we call interpretive communities. And you choose your interpretive community and you try to work within that because it sustains you, it inspires you, it challenges you, So it may be that we don't all stop to, as it were, explicate what we are doing for any and all people. That's impossible, and you will lose a focus if you do. So if we are not going to the town as much and we are staying in our gowns, you will understand that it's a choice that we make. And let there not be any value judgments. I've recently seen an article claiming that some of us are writing specialized articles and that these are not available to basically people who don't read. And so the point is, let's try to translate these things. It's fine to translate these things, but I think we should leave those people who are working in these rarefied areas to continue to think in those terms. There's no rush about this, you know. You may write something now and it may stay obscure for a while, but 15, 20 years from now, suddenly people will start talking about it. You were very kind to mention that you talk about some of my work. Back, so I'm going to reveal my age here, but when I got out of graduate school, let's just say in the 1980s, when I started writing, there were things that I was saying then that nobody was paying attention to. I wrote a little article called Embracing the Non-West, and I published it in a theory journal. Probably nobody has read it because it's an obscure theory journal, comes out of Rochester. And suddenly, in the wake of George Floyd and the Black Lives Movement and so on, everyone is talking about embracing the Non-West. So my article is 20-something years hidden in a journal somewhere. And this is the way of scholarship, right? The things that we say, you know, may come back and become more relevant and so on. You can't always be worrying about that relevance immediately. As if when you publish an article, it must elicit a change. If you want to do that, go and do journalism or something else, you know? But think in the highest and the most ideal terms, and then let the word have the reception that it will have. It may be gradual, you know, it may be sudden, you know, who knows? I'm not answering your question directly in terms, I think you were asking for a statement about the series as such.
Yes.
It's wonderful to have a series like that, so I certainly applaud that. But I just want to make a point about choices we make as scholars.
Yeah, thank you so much for. Well, by the way, that was just more like introductory. Yeah, I have 5 questions that we can engage together. Yeah, I have 5 questions. So the first question is basically some of your early books, particularly the one that really centers around European music studies topics. Yeah. So my question is, you've written essentially both on both Western European classical music and African musical traditions. How have you navigated between these musical worlds? And how have your identity as a Ghanaian scholar influenced your approach to both?
Okay.
And one more point, Prof.
Yes.
You also, at least I was just checking this as of today, the Dent Medal criteria and those on that line. I think you are probably the only black there, or let's say from Africa on that list.
Maybe, yeah. I haven't checked to see whether I'm one of them. That's not particularly relevant, but I have the certificate in my study. That's the only thing that matters. But okay, so but let me be straightforward here, because you're asking a huge autobiographical question, which may take too long to answer. But I grew up, my father was a minister in the Presbyterian church, Evangelical Presbyterian. So pianos and organs, harmoniums and so on were very much our milieu. I composed like most people. And in fact, when I went to the UK as an undergraduate, I thought I was going to be a composer. But at the end of 3 years as an undergraduate, I realized that even though I was writing music, as they said in one letter of recommendation that was smuggled to me, he is competent as a composer, but not adventurous. Competent, but not adventurous. But you know, think, what would it be to be adventurous, but not competent? Of course, the people who were getting the attention were people who were adventurous then, okay? But at the same time, scholarship was very interesting to me, very challenging. So I embraced scholarship. And I've always felt that something of a composer's way of thinking or a composer's sensibility would inform the kind of scholarship that I was doing. That is why I became interested in analysis. Sometimes they call it theory, but they're two different things, by the way. But that's why I became interested in looking at the musical phenomenon itself, trying to understand the way it works. So I always proceed from the music or from some idea of the music. Now, I'm not trying to undercomplicate anything. I know there are people here who want to get into the ontologies of music and so on. But there is something, a phenomenon that I would say is the music itself. It may evolve, it may change, and so on. But you cannot deny that, right? So I work with that. In terms of what, you were asking about European studies in European music, studies in African music. Frankly, when I was in secondary school, I wasn't thinking this is European music or this is African music. It was music to us, right? So when we did Founders Day and we were dancing Agbaja or whatever it is, it was something we did. It was dance, we enjoyed it, we threw ourselves in it. And when we were singing Hallelujah Chorus or whatever it is, it was something we did, right? These labels, which have loomed like now and somehow determined people's futures and so on, were less visible to some of us. The important thing was that we threw ourselves into the phenomenon to get the most out of it, to perform well, to perform in tune, God forbid, to perform in an excited way, to compose something, but not to be saddled with a zillion theories about what you do or don't do. I think theory is a huge problem. And we can spend some time talking about that, maybe not at this thing. But I really genuinely feel for many of our younger scholars who are overwhelmed with theories and what to do with them. Anyway, so European and African, there's not much more to say than that. I was introduced to some ways of thinking when I was a graduate student, by my teacher at the time, Leonard Ratner at Stanford, and I became interested in musical semiotics. I never took a course in semiotics. I got hold of a bunch of books. I read them. They started to make sense. And I thought, wow, this sort of helps to explain this aspect of music. So let me see if I can make that application. And I wrote a book called Playing with Signs. It was published in 1991. And unbeknownst to me, the book seemed to have had quite a bit of an impact. The Society for Music Theory gave it their then Young Scholar Award. So believe it or not, I was young once. I continue to teach from that book sometimes. But it's a book that deals with musical meaning and thinks about music as a science system. So that's one side. On the African side, as I think probably the experience of several people my generation, as a result of the institutional arrangement, I never had a course in African music. There was a lot of African performance in which we were engaged, but as a course that teaches you whether it's theory or history or whatever it is about African music, zilch. What we did have were books that you can read. So in Nketiah's book, The Music of Africa, we read it. This is a different experience now from the people who came after us, who were taught from these books. And woe betide you if you don't write that polyphony means many voices and use the same phrase as in the textbook if you want to pass the exam, that is. I was spared that, right? So what it means, and I'm not holding this up as a virtue necessarily, I'm just saying that is the experience that I had. It therefore freed me in a way to make up my mind about what I wanted to make of any of these texts. I did actually write a review of the music of Africa many, many years later, about which the author was not pleased, but that's another story we can talk about. The most direct way I can answer your question is that, I'm not as conscious on a certain level of creativity of being in one space as opposed to being in another space. When I'm writing about Mozart, I'm not sitting there thinking, someone is going to say, but what is an African doing writing about Mozart? You know? And by the same token, if I'm writing about, Akpafu dirges, Akpafu is my hometown. If I'm writing about Akpafu dirges, I'm not hoping for a reader who will say, he's Akpafu, so we won't even engage. He's correct. He's right. That's patronizing. We want this work to be taken seriously. We engage it. So coming with credentials of various sorts that we announce at the beginning of our articles and so on, there's a lot of distraction there, I have to say. I'm weary of distraction, and I want to see people doing things. Get on with it. You're a composer, you get on with it. In fact, you're a composer because you are miserable when you don't compose. That's what it means to be a composer, Think about things like that. So I'm afraid if you lead me down the theory path or the framing path, I'm going to escape, because I find those not as meaningful. In fact, I've never found them particularly meaningful. I find certain kinds of methodologies helpful as points of departure, right? So you begin there and then you take it somewhere. I never find them as ends. So even though some people know me as having made contributions to semiotics, for example, I tell them, well, I'm self-taught, to use a fashionable word here, when it comes to semiotics. I start off, you read Peirce, you read Saussure, and then you go down through Morris, and all these people, we come down to present day. Now I find myself teaching courses in semiotics, but I don't have enough expertise to align myself with one particular school. And again, that is part of a larger kind of post-colonial thing that we have, because we are relating to Europe sort of at a certain angle, so we have to pick and choose. And at the end of my book, Representing African Music, I said the way to approach this sort of theoretical heritage is through, opportunistic pragmatism. And some people were upset about that, They want you to commit to one thing. You are this. We want to be able to put a label on you.
I think I remember clearly, Prof. I think one of the first questions I asked you the first time I met you was, are you actually a scholar of identity? And I remember the very ways in which you... So I remember how you responded that day, which is the same way. I think you have also been very consistent in the ways you, over the years, you have been very consistent in the way you respond to this, question around theory, semiotics, and how you. So I ask you, are you into identity discourse? And you respond to me, I think in the same manner. Oh, I am not. Which I just want to remind you. That
yes.
You've also been very consistent over the years in the ways you respond to this particular question. Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up. This was in Stellenbosch.
Stellenbosch, yeah.
But let me say something about identity, because it's again another thing that looms large. I don't do identity. In fact, I said that once at a conference, and somebody immediately went on Twitter or something. Says, Agawu says, I don't do identity. I don't do identity because the experiences that I've had always place identity in somebody else's hands. They want to say, but so who are you really? But we've seen you doing this, we've seen you doing that. Why should that be of interest to me? That's your problem. You can decide. If you see that my skin color is this way, and you find me writing about Schumann or Berlioz or Mahler, and it's a problem for you, then go and solve your own problem. I'm not solving that problem for you. So I find identity very much a distraction in that sense, okay? But if you are secure in your identity, that's all you need. That's the existential security that you need to keep going. When I'm in my hometown and I'm talking to, my relatives and so on, we're not really discussing identity, even though they make fun of me because I sometimes get the tones wrong because I've been gone for too long. But some of these issues of identity I find completely distracting. So, and just one anecdote on that front. I once spoke to Valentin Mudimbe. I don't know how many of you have come across this name. Mudimbe was a distinguished philosopher, literary theorist, and so on, who listened to a lot of Gregorian chants. He's also a very devoted Catholic. And Mudimbe wrote a book called The Invention of Africa. You may have seen that. And I asked him this question about identity that you're asking me now. And he speaks with a French accent, you know. He said, it's a form of mystification. You know, it's a form of mystification. It's all he said in that gnomic way in which Mudimbe talks. So, again, I'm saying that this is my attitude to identity. I quite understand that many young people are talking about it now. They are talking about, you know, diasporic identities and so on. I find a lot of that discourse, for me, a complete distraction because it doesn't lead to anything. It leads to, you know, certain alliances that are often not really very permanent, you know. And we can talk about what replaces identity if it is a distraction. But I realize this is a minority view, so I want to be careful to say, I'm not saying don't do identity, I'm just saying I don't do identity.
Thank you so much, Prof.
And then, of course, the psychoanalyst in the room will say, actually, because he's protesting so much, he really does do identity. That is because you're skilled.
Perhaps silence could also mean another form of response.
Yes, that could be.
Yeah.
That could be, yeah.
Okay, let's quickly move to the next question, which also built on this part. I think we can say it's actually the elephant in the room anytime you mention Kofi Agawu. And that's the book you know about, representing African music. How do you feel about that?
Well, is it the elephant in the room?
Yeah, everywhere.
That book is 20 years old now, believe it or not.
So this is my question, Prof.
Yes.
To that one. In your book, Representing African Music, you challenge Western academic frameworks for studying African music. Over 2 decades later, do you still think the field has responded meaningfully to those critiques, one? Or are we still stuck in what you called post-colonial entrapments?
Okay, well, let me just say I do not know and I cannot speak with any authority on what is going on in the field. In fact, in any of the fields. These fields are huge. They publish many, many things. And I don't know how many of us bother to read all the journals, you know, to follow the reviews of books, to look at, you know, if you haven't done that thorough homework, you cannot be speaking about the field, you know. But we are in a hurry to say ethnomusicology is this, music theory is this, you know. What happened to modesty? You know, think about the few influential books that you have read, talk about them and engage them. But what is this obsession with fields and large profiles of fields? I don't get that. So if you ask me now, do I think, say, the field of ethnomusicology has changed or has responded in a way? Yes, I know isolated, you know, responses
of course,
to my work.
Perhaps I should be very specific.
Yeah.
I know you have some good friends, in quotes, who actually engage the book, and I'm going to mention this is scholarly space.
Yes.
Vert Ehrman was one of them who really, you know, and Vert Ehrman, Louis Menkes,
Yes.
Carol Muller. We can say the South African cohort
Yes.
of the American ethnomusicological circuit, you know,
Yes.
or, you know, ecosystem,
Yes.
actually engage you. And I can remember clearly the notion of difference.
Yes.
Yeah, Vert Ehrman and Louis Menkes were particularly taking you up in the notion of, you mentioned difference and different. Are you still holding that perspective of there is no difference, or you're contesting difference now?
Yeah, I am, and that has to be contextualized so you understand what I mean, okay? I'm talking about certain essentialized differences.
Okay.
When you are doing scholarship, And by the way, a lot of these problems are for those of us in the humanities. People in the sciences, if you're in the lab and it says, mix this and mix that, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. It gives you a certain result, okay? And for us in music theory, some of what we do is closer to what the scientists do and what the mathematicians do. So if I'm contesting difference, I'm contesting certain facile attributions of difference that somehow make people feel good, but don't actually touch the substance of what we are doing, If you are a pianist and you want to play a scale and there's a metronome number, you learn to play that scale. It doesn't matter, if it doesn't even matter what your fingers are like, certainly it doesn't matter what your skin color is, just do the damn thing, And I found that some of the difference talk, the difference mongering, was a real problem. Now, as far as these reviewers were concerned, I was very interested in the fact that my book, this 2003 book, seems to have irked a number of my colleagues from South Africa, or who were associated with South Africa. The most savage of the reviews was the one by Louis Menkes, who is a professor at Duke University now. And I don't want to go too long in this because fortunately we only have 3 minutes to do this, but let me just say specifically, she brings several charges against the book. One is that it's contradictory, that I contradict myself. One is that I use questionable rhetorical strategies. Okay. One is that I don't always give data. I just say, you know how we say if the cap fits, you wear it, yeah? So we don't name names. And all of these things, all of these charges are based on certain cultural assumptions, okay? We can name without naming, okay? I don't have to come now and make a plea for, yes, we know how to name without actually naming. And everyone will know who we are talking about, So if I use that, now you can say, no, we will not accept that strategy in scholarly circles. There's an argument to be made for that. But you can also say, no, as long as we allow for poetry, and as long as we allow for nuance and for insinuation and so on, that is okay. So I wrote a little bit about, I've never published on any kind of response to these reviewers, but
I know you're not used to responding to them.
Yeah, it's because I think some of these notions are there, they will work themselves out eventually. I will just mention one because it may be of interest to this group. Fight Ellman, he accuses me of mixing Africanism and universalism. So he says there's a curious mix of Africanism and universalism. He is disturbed by the fact that I critique the West, So I critique European scholars, what they say, and so on and so forth. But he says, when it comes to the African side of things, he just leaves them uninterrogated. They are gifts. They are things that are given. And I was trying to figure out, where is that third space that he wants me to occupy, right? Not the universalist space, not the Africanist space, but some third transcendental space where I can be pronouncing on what the universalists are doing or the Africanists are doing. Come on, But this is the kind of thing that happens in the theory world. We start to abstract things, and before you realize, you are very far removed from anything real. So that was a problem. The other problem, with Ellman, it's funny that you mentioned this because I wasn't thinking about Ellman for the longest time, is about music theory. I professionally, now I'm a professor of music theory. For a long time, I was just professor of music, but I'm now in a music theory department, and I meet with Schenkerians and set theorists and so on every single day. It's a very good life. I recommend it. Ellman thinks, because of my affiliation with music theory, that somehow I think music theory is a better field or a stronger field than ethnomusicology. That's an assumption he makes, Now, he will say what I'm saying suggests that, but I deploy analytical methods that come from the field of music theory to talk about some things, to illuminate them. That's all I'm interested in, this use of theory. But as for credentializing and saying we're standing there, you know, it may be that I say things in ways that would suggest that I'm somehow holding a banner for, you know, this downtrodden field, this music theory that has been maligned by ethnomusicologists. But I think that is a mistake. It's almost like saying, oh, I see you dressed this way, so you must be this, and so I put you in that category, and that then informs everything I say about you. I think that was an error on his part. He may dispute it, no doubt. So I didn't answer your question about the field and where it is now. I do think many of the issues I brought up are relevant. They've been taken in other directions. So the critique of difference, for that, nobody's going to change my mind about it, at least not in this lifetime.
And that's actually my next question.
Yes, okay.
We are going to extend 10 more minutes
Sure.
to eat into the other session.
Okay.
I think it's important. So, but the question for me is, of course, I appreciate and I understand. I know Bert Ehrman's work. He's one of the superstar also, you know, in terms of South African scholars, which I really respect him so much. Bert Ehrman, and in fact, all your critiques, they are also the big shot in the global space, and I respect them so much. But the question for me, if more like a follow-up question, is the ways in which you conceptualize that material, that book, that text, was intentional. I know about that. And it was a time that it was also very much needed. It was the season of post-coloniality. Actually, Mbebe recently wrote on the post-colony 2001. I think there's another work 10 years before that. That's when in my father's house. Was it in my father's house?
Mm-hmm. That's Apia.
Apia. Mm-hmm. And also, I think we're having that conversation in the last, from the 80s, 90s, and it was changing dynamic until early 2000 when the likes of Achille Mbembe and you came on spot and started. I think King Kidula also wrote an interesting article in that area in 2006, also Jean Kidula. But my question is, your critiques, your challenge, calling out, you called out some people, like you said. There's a way you talk that you can talk about something and addressing somebody and you not mentioning name, but everybody knows who you're talking about, you know. Like you wrote in the chapter 8 of one editor who challenged you as an African, and what authority do you have? How to analyze African, who challenged you? Both of, I know the person you're talking about.
That's all we need.
I know the person you're talking about, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, but let's keep it just right. So, but the point is, if you were to write the book today, would there be any change or changes in terms of conceptualization, framing, and your argument? Would you have toned down your critiques?
No, I would have stepped it up rather instead of toning down. Let's be clear here. A lot of writing is a performance, right? I mean, or can be. And I mean, sometimes we are so thin-skinned in the field of music. Go and read African philosophy. When Huntonji and Wiredu and all those people are going back and forth, intensely, because it matters to them, But as for us, if you just say something small about somebody's, hey, who is Agawu? Who does he think he is? And so on. We are desperately needing debate in our field. I mean, we've had sporadic moments when there have been debate, but we need honest debate about issues, and they should be focused on the issues. Interesting that all these critics you are mentioning, go back to, if you don't mind, go back to representing African music. You'll see, yes, there's a chapter on the archive. There's a chapter on popular music, right? It's called Popular Music Defended Against Its Devotees. And I talk about high life, I transcribe some E.T. Mensah, and so I talk about these things. Well, Ehrman said, yeah, it's one of the best efforts he has seen recently, but then he moves on. right? I talk about analysis, how not to analyze African music. Very few of these reviewers engage what I have to say about African music. But the moment you critique somebody, like somebody who went and lived in Central Africa and was telling us about their research, giving us so much biographical detail, autobiographical detail, but not telling us that the person who was taking them around was actually now going to be their husband, you know? And I pointed this out. I wasn't the first to point that out.
Do you mean the gone native ethnomusicologists, ethnographers?
Yes.
The gone native ethnographers, those who marry in the court of the
yes,
study?
who marry your chief informant.
The chief informant, yeah.
Yeah, good for the chief informant. But, you know, but when you say something like that, then, you know, fire is coming out. People are very, very upset about that. I said, but I'm saying, if you're crafting an ethnography, you're making a choice. So what do you choose to report and what do you choose to suppress? That's a very fair question. You know? You may not like it because you are the one whose work is being cited as an example, but it'll be true with me, it'll be true with anything that Bode writes, that we make choices based on what we think, you know, will strengthen the argument or that we think is relevant and so on and so forth. But let's talk about it. You know? Again, debates in anthropology, debates in African philosophy, these things are already going on there. And in fact, I found that for me, the inspiration to come back to the issues we're bringing up, inspiration came a lot from reading these post-colonial theories. You know, some of them I don't understand. You know, you read Mudimbe and your head is spinning, it's going this way and that way. But there is something there, you know. You read Appiah is always very lucid, very accessible. These people were real inspiration to me. That's where they came from. Now, of course, to say that they're Africans, maybe that's part of the identity thing that I'm denying, but I found that these are people who were well-trained in various European discourses, but also well-read in the African discourses that they were engaging. And that was an inspiration to me. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I know. Like I said earlier, the consistency over the year also in terms of the way you address this. Okay, let me put this way. You know, there was a time I had a conversation with you also. I think we had this more like gossip thing, you know, about this.
Gossip?
Yeah, more like a gossip side talk regarding this, you know, regarding the. I just want to go to that.
Yeah.
But where I asked you particularly in Bloomington when we met about that particular editor which challenged you, because I've been thinking over the years myself that, what's happening? I often go back to that particular chapter and ask myself, what's going on here? Which we still have the same.
You mean about the rejected article?
The rejected article.
Yeah.
And
eventually it was accepted.
Yeah, I know. But the question is, representing Africa is quite important, and you remember, every time I see you, I ask something about a chapter, and every time, I think it has always been this particular chapter, because each time you read it, there's something about it I see very important, strange, and also very, very, you know, propelling in terms of the ways the argument emerged. Now, there's a particular article you wrote, I think it's in 1997, standard, contesting standard.
Contesting difference.
Contesting difference, yeah. And I think part of it was also part of the book, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and you spoke a lot about what is standard patterns. Mm-hmm. Standard pattern.
A rhythmic pattern.
Rhythmic pattern, yeah. Standard pattern, rhythmic pattern, particularly the to, ko, to, po, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and you came up with series of analysis, additive and the other one. Additive and divisive, yeah, patterns. So, but over the years also, people have also engaged this difference now. So, today, how do we understand? Because things keep changing. Where are we in this conversation?
Yeah. So, I'm glad you mentioned that article. That's an article from 2006. It's in a journal called the Journal of the American Musicological Society. I wrote this article because I thought it would be good to take one common rhythmic pattern that circulates very widely. You all know it here. We know it in Ghana. People in Liberia know it. It's in Central Africa. Even I think in Tunisia, somebody found instances of it. But anyway, the thing we call the standard pattern. It's mentioned because it has some absolutely fascinating properties, and I'm talking about mathematical properties. Okay, people have been talking about it, and I thought, okay, let me use that as a basis to talk about knowledge construction. Some people feel it a certain way. They have a certain metrical attitude to it. Some people, see it differently, and so on. So that's what I did in that article. I went through all kinds of possibilities and so on. Submitted this article. I thought it was a pretty okay article. Submitted it to the journal. 4 reports came. 3 of them says, don't publish this article. And 1 said, publish it. Okay, I won't identify that one in case I embarrass him. But the 3 who said they didn't want the article to be published, one said that there's no new data here. You see, that's the trick that the ethnographers use. They say, but you haven't gone to another village which we haven't talked about before to bring that data, And I'm saying, no, this rhythmic pattern that different people are talking about, we say is the same, but how is it the same? What's wrong with that way of thinking also, or that kind of scholarship, you see? And people who sit on review, on boards, who review articles and so on, sometimes come with their own prejudices about scholarship, about what is good scholarship or what is not good. Some of them are also, I'm sorry to say it this way, but some of them are also lazy people who look for certain standard things, and if they don't find them in your article, then they will say, reject this article. They will look at the list of references. Foucault is not there. Then you're not. Why would we be doing that? Think about it. What about somebody, and this came up, it's come up in this conference, and I'll be very pleased with it, that, look, we are all already in theory. That you cannot be human without being in theory, okay? So the only issue is, have you translated your theory, the implicit theory that enables you to open a door or go to the bathroom and flush the toilet or any of those things, have you translated it into some metropolitan language? If you haven't put it in that metropolitan language, whether it's Bourdieu or Foucault or Derrida, then somebody sitting on some board will say, no, we are not going to publish it. They are not current, That's terrible. We should be embarrassed about that. We, and I say we, I mean we as post-colonial Africans, because we are coming with a set of premises that are much more complicated. We're not coming from, a kind of a Parisian milieu immediately. We're trying to engage that stuff, but we're also coming with other baggage. So anyway, that's just...
Prof.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
You're a Bourdieu guy. So, sorry, I didn't mean to provoke you, but mentioning...
Of course, I understand, Prof. I understand. And I also get you. But the question, of course, the notion of everyday theory you spoke about is quite important. And we've had series, it's almost a kind of everyday conversation here in terms of the notion of everyday life, which is quite central to the current discourse in anthropology, even musicology and ethnomusicology. So everyday life, what we do, they are theory themselves. The theory is not sitting somewhere and you need to go and put it on. No, they are part of what we do. I also think, I think I'm wearing my ethnomusicological cap right now, and I don't mean to provoke you also. So
that's fine.
So the point is that ethnomusicology itself, like anthropology or the sisters, field around it, it's about everyday life. We all know that. And everyday life itself is a theory. So we talk about everyday life, what people play, how they interpret, how they do this, how they do that. These are all discourse around what we do. And people interpret it, and that's what the scholars, perhaps the ethnomusicologists, also document that eventually became a kind of standard, and they expect. But my question to you in that sense is that I think somebody mentioned something, perhaps you were the one, or Prof, that we also need to follow the standard. You want to get promotion. Okay, not you, I think somebody. We want to get promotion, and because of that, we have what we call Not higher, yeah. We want to, we need, we want to get promotion. For it to be promoted, there are standards, there are templates, principles that are institutionalized, that have been institutionalized that one needs to follow. For instance, like what you said, there are ways you must reference, there are ways you must do this, there are ways you must do that. But the question is, if people don't follow that pattern of doing the Bourdieu, coming back to my own, Bourdieu, Apadurai, Omibaba, Wiredu, Anthony Appiah, and Agawu, of course, Omojola. Yeah. So then the point is, how are they going to be, they need that credential. It's a form of exclusion and inclusion in the academia. If you don't have those language, you don't belong. Yeah. So
I hear you,
okay.
And I think that is a very important thing. It all depends on how we train our students. Now, nothing I'm saying here suggests that you shouldn't read a book and that you already have theory. I'm not saying that at all. You cannot really generalize for all the fields, but I can say it is important to show that you are in control, that you understand some of what is influential in the field, that you speak in a way that is accessible to people in that field. All of that is part of the training, And you may, in fact, begin to sound like a semiotician if you're with the semioticians without knowing it, by virtue of reading that stuff. And I will have something to say about reading in a second. But so I understand that credential building, we cannot make a generalization about this. So if you ask me, for example, what do I do in my African rhythm seminar? Okay, I teach an African rhythm seminar to music theory students. Every 2 years, I give the same seminar. Bode has spoken to my seminar several times. And what I do is I want to make sure that they know and have read the important works, because they're theorists, all the important theoretical works, that they will have read them. I want to make sure that they know enough repertory, that they have listened to a certain number of recordings, so that, because most of these people don't necessarily have first-hand experience. Some of them do, but not all of them have first-hand. But they should know the repertory. This is very important. Africa, Lomax said many years ago, Africa is the best recorded continent, But how many of us listen to recordings? Now you do, because you have YouTube and all these streaming services. So we thank God for that. There's more and more listening. But that kind of, curious listening is very, very important to give us a sense of this larger, thing we're calling it. So they need to know that, and then they need to be able to write a paper, formulate something. In doing this, I'm hoping that my students will get the training that when they get out of my class, they know what the important literature is on that subject, that they have a sense of, their own position. And that is very important to me, by the way. They're not just robots writing summaries, 2-page summaries of every one. I say, you write what you are hearing in this from a rhythmic point of view, And also with academia, we do a lot of things. I was telling Adako yesterday about doing exercises. Sometimes it's good, and theorists know this, to say, okay, let me try to analyze this melody using Shankar's theory, just to see what will come out of it. But don't tell me that, no, Shankar has been discredited because he said he was a racist, because he made, disparaging remarks. So if you go that route, you will never read Hegel. You won't read Kant, because there are some terrible things in these philosophers. But that's not the point. What's her name? Gayatri Spivak said, Hegel says some unspeakable things about Africa, but I can still use Hegel, is the way she said it. You have to be pragmatic, because otherwise you're going to go through the world and strike out all the people who once upon a time, in some documents, you won't read Deman, and so on, I cannot afford to do that.
Prof, can I interrupt you, please?
Yes, sorry.
I think this is quite fascinating. Unfortunately, we need to switch into the next section. But before that, I have 2 questions. We are going to quickly talk about before that.
Are we going to get to the mentorship? And
definitely, we are getting it, definitely.
Okay.
So the first one, we are going to make this one very brief, actually.
Yes,
The first one is related to this question of or because this is, let me put it in another context. Perhaps because this person is from somewhere else, this one is, so I'm going to, it's our music, it's our culture. So we need to write in our own way, in quote now, our music, so they are white, we're not talking about white, talking about Asian. So does that mean that, okay, let me put it this way. There are assumptions elsewhere that because I'm an African, I'm the only one who has the authority, perhaps, to write about Africa. So it's our music. Whatever they've written is not relevant because they are not us. You know, but I have been telling people, look, of course, I am not the supporter of our music, or because I'm Yoruba and everything Yoruba, I automatically take ownership of it. Yeah, I'm not. Although I do identity, but I don't do that kind of identity. You know. Yeah, I don't do that kind of identity. So, but the question is, what do you have to say to those categories of people who, because they are African and anything white, anything European is not the...
Well, again, I mean, you feel sorry for them because, in a way, don't judge something until you've actually had a chance to examine it, to know what it's saying, okay? There are people who know titles of books, and they'll be talking as if they've actually read a page from the book, but they haven't. But the title, they have inferred the contents of that, you know? I wrote an article once called, it's in the book too, Tonality as a Colonizing Force in Africa. The number of people who have talked to me about that article, mentioning things that I didn't talk about, and overlooking some of the things, the arguments that I made, which are actually towards the end of the article, which is lamenting the loss of our engagement with indigenous resources, you know. They don't talk about that. They just like the idea that, yeah, he's giving it to them, you know. Tonality is a colonizing force, so let's point a finger at the Europeans and so on. So, no, I think it's premature. And you are scholars. If you're a scholar, part of your claim is that you engage with scholarship, you know. So please, before you make any pronouncements, check it out. Remember that we don't all say the same things about African music. Rhythm, for example. Mekinzewi has his view of rhythm. Willie Anku has his view of rhythm. Nketia has his view of rhythm. These are all insiders. Simha Arom has his view of rhythm. In fact, and maybe this will be my last anecdote and we can go on. I was at a conference in Spain once, and Simha Arom and Willie Anku, my colleague from Ghana, who's unfortunately passed away, were at the same conference. And they started arguing about rhythm. They were getting very passionate. In fact, it was getting so passionate that some of us were worried that it would turn into a fist fight. But we all knew who would win, right? It has to be. Simha is short and Anku is tall. So at least in terms of reach, the African had the people. But the funny thing is that they were arguing with the same premise. They were arguing for the same view, you know? And somehow they were talking past each other, you know? But Simha is a systematic, you know, comes out of the French structuralist tradition, writing, you know, 600 pages about rhythm, going through all the parts. Anku is also somebody who uses computers, he has a set theory thing that some of you may know about. And some of the argument I think was, you know, just about personnel and so on. And Simha is very dogmatic, or at least he comes across as being very dogmatic. And Anku was not going to let up on that day. So my point, though, is that there is no necessary unanimity in the way that we see things. The important thing for us as scholars is we get together and we debate these things. And if at the end of the day you still say your position is the correct one, then go home with your position. You know? But the debate is what I'm talking about. Our refusal to have those debates, that's really letting us down. You know? So I won't go on, but
perhaps on the debate also,
yes.
It's perhaps on the continent, it might also be as a result of, how like this now, in a very nice way. It might be as a result of, because debate happen with information. When people are informed, like you read books and you understand, let's say, Nketiah's ideas of reading, Omojola's ideas of reading, Agawu's ideas of reading, Simaharam's ideas. So different. That allows for diverse perspective, and one can draw from different. But when this is not the case for scholars, it's very difficult to have a debate with their perhaps cohort, and that it turns into emotional argument or kind of argument in most cases. No, well, that's just by the way anyway.
And I would just say we can foster a spirit of debate in our classes. I happen to be lucky these last 5 years I teach graduate students in small seminars, 12, 15 at the most. I don't have a class bigger than 15 people because you can't really have a proper debate, you know. So I set a limit and we sit there and we work at these texts, you know. So, but that's you know, I've earned it after many years of teaching large surveys and so on. But you as an instructor can foster that spirit of debate, you know. People have to read the text. And again, on the reading thing, it's not so much, even if you don't get through all 30 pages of the text, but you get through 10 of those pages carefully, you know, so that you understand what is being said and can paraphrase it. You can say it in your own language. You're not just copying and pasting, you know. Once you are in that situation, you are beginning to, you know, get into the mode. And I think when people, you know, read closely and they come and debate openly, then we are building the knowledge. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Now on the last one, sorry. I said two, and so this is the last one, and this last one is actually the exit point into something else. Yeah, and it's about the future directions that we're talking about. So you have mentored generations of scholars, and your works have shaped discourse in musicology, music theory, and ethnomusicology, even across the related disciplines of music. Now, what urgent questions should young African scholars be asking today?
Okay, you know I'm definitely not going to answer that question, right? Because I'm not a prophet. I don't see into the future. I cannot tell you what urgent questions. I don't know what you had for breakfast. I don't know what your lives are like. I don't know what your ambitions are like. I don't know what your aptitude for work is, and so on. It would be incredibly presumptuous of me to sit here and say, you know, by next week we should all have read this or we should have listened to this, okay? That's policy. Do that. Let the people who are experts in formulating educational policy do that based on their circumstances, you know. For example, I tell my students, read this, my graduate students, it's kind of a general thing, read one article a day. One article a day. Sit down at the beginning of the week, plan what articles you're going to read, and read them. Just one a day, not more than one, or one chapter. By the end of the year, you'll have read how many? 365. You see? Okay. We all know that that's ideal. Maybe you won't get to one a day. But 2 a week even, 3 a week, you know, that's to foster a reading culture. If you have that ambition, if you don't, and you want to be all the time in the practice room, that's fine. That's a different lifestyle you've chosen. And I'm sure that there will be a similar rubric for someone who wants to be a virtuoso pianist and so on. But I really do feel that one of our problems in Africa is that there's too much advice. There are too many people giving advice without sufficient knowledge and sensitivity to local conditions. And those local conditions include the institutional environment that you are in. You know, so you will figure out, and I'm sure you figured out, how you can get your students to go from one point to another. So when you talk about future directions, yes, on a grand level we can say we hope to build the discourse, we hope we'll be more informed, and so on and so forth. But beyond that, I think it would probably be better if I did not start to give prescriptions for future directions.
Thanks so much, Prof. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
That goes into, when I said earlier on that you're a composer because you're miserable when you're not composing, I meant that, that you are constantly, and of course that means you're also thinking about composition. But I feel as if we expend a lot of energy on, how to do it, what is the right one, and I'm not sure that actually is as important. If I look at European music in the 20th century, I can see that, yes, there's been a big growth of compositional theory, in part because there's less of a common language, even in the European tradition, than there was in the 19th century, or in the 18th century, where there was a language, a shared language. So Haydn is not developing theories before he writes. He knows, he has a sense of what the tonal system enables. In other words, he speaks that language, and then he can write 100 and something symphonies, or he can write X number of string quartets, The language is there. And, but when you come into the 20th century, you get a very different thing, and then you get, some people say there's an absence of mother tongue in the 20th century as far as music is concerned. I think we should be maybe a little less concerned with these broader prescriptions and just deal with individual cases. So if you're a composition teacher and you do want to give them an assignment, we're going to write pieces based on the standard pattern or on this clave pattern or something, right? As a rhythmic thing. Do it. But for goodness sake, do it. Let's not spend too much time worrying about it. Leave the 3 or 4 theorists who have nothing else to do to be writing about, all the internal properties of this and so on, and let the composers do it. Because composition is a doing. That's what it is. I'll leave it there.
Okay, I think, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. Yeah. Now you now stand, let's do that one. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Let's do it, please. Thank you.